Hi, and welcome back to the Azure Cloud Chronicles. I'm John Morehouse, Principal Consultant with D'Antoni Associates, and I'll let Joey introduce.
Thanks. And I'm Joey D'Antoni. I'm Principal Consultant and Principal Cloud Architect.
And we are back in the talking about cloud cost optimizations. Joey and I have both said for a really long time that if you are paying retail in the cloud, you are probably doing it wrong. We've had a couple of different videos already about different methods to help save money in the cloud. And Azure and Microsoft recently announced a new type of savings optimization called savings plans for databases. And our wonderful Joey has actually written an article, so we're going to interview Joey and ask some questions. So Joey, can you tell us at a high level what the differences between reservations and savings plans are?
Yeah, just to get started, both of these are financial commitments. Reservations are 1 or 3 years that you make to Microsoft, and a savings plan is just 1 year, effectively for the amount of spend you're going to have on a cloud resource. And traditionally, from a database perspective, reservations were the only thing we had. Reservations were the thing that came first. Savings plans came later. Up until last week on Azure, savings plans were only available for VMs. I think it was just VMs and there's a few other random resources that are like VM related. If you buy the really expensive app service that I can never remember the name of, where it's like buying a whole rack, that's something you could buy a savings plan for. But in both cases, you're making a financial commitment for a spend, and you're going to get billed for that spend either way. The big difference between savings plans and reservations is that reservations tend to have a higher discount percentage, but they're less flexible. So with savings plans, you're committing to not committing to a region, you're just committing to a core account. And specifically with this Azure savings plans for databases, I talked to marketing for this, and they call this savings plans for databases, which is like a really terrible term because when you search it, it doesn't mean anything. I call it kind of savings plans for databases on Azure when I'm searching. You can go across the entire portfolio of Azure databases. So whether it be Postgres, MySQL, Cosmos, Azure SQL Managed Instance, any of those things, those are all things you can get savings on. So up to and including sort of SQL and Azure VMs, but that's a weird talking area. But anyway, the big difference is the discount's a bit higher. We'll talk more about the discount because it's really weird for Azure SQL Database specifically, and how those apply. And then we'll kind of get through to that and go through some of those. I built that a scenario in the column, and we'll talk through that.
And where's your article hosted now?
Yeah, it's on redmondmag.com. You can find it on my LinkedIn. You can find it all the places, but it's on redmondmag.com. I have a column there that's called Joey on SQL Server that about 40% of the time is about SQL Server. I've been trying to change it, but they haven't done it. So, but yeah. SQL Server articles still get the most hits, though. Take that, Fabric.
Yeah, and you've been writing there for a really long time, and I love your articles. Yeah. If you're not familiar with Joey's articles, definitely go check it out at redmondmag.com. So you kind of explained the main differences between reservations and savings plans. Like, how do you, and I have customers that have used reservations, and you and I are both huge proponents for reservations, but they are limited, right? Mm-hmm. They are limited to that. You're stuck with that region. When they first came out, there was a big issue with exchanges and refunds and that type of stuff. But how do you currently scope reservations and the new savings plans to fit your organization? Where do you start with that?
So the scopes can go pretty much just like all the security scopes in Azure. And I'm going to start out at the bottom and work my way to the top, and then I'll actually answer your question. You can scope it to an individual resource. You'd be absolutely insane if you scoped it down to one resource because you don't want to do it that way. You can scope it down to a resource group. Slightly less insane, still a little bit insane. Where I really would typically want to go would be at least at a subscription level. And that's going to depend on how your organization does chargeback. Because the one other scope above subscription is management group. And we've talked about these hierarchies within Azure. A management group can be a group of subscriptions. And the reason why you might want to scope a reservation or a savings plan at a subscription level is if all the billing for a specific subscription gets charged back to a specific department. If it's more holistic in your company and you're trying to save money across the board, I would use a management group across my subscriptions in order to do that. But that's going to be your mileage may vary. The reason why you would want to do that is we'll talk a little bit more about how these apply a little bit later, but any database in those environments can consume that savings plan, or if you had a reservation, that reservation, and that's how you want it to be. You want to make sure any database spend you have is getting consumed by that savings plan, so you're seeing that discount. And by scoping it at the highest level, it makes it easier for it to get picked up.
And with that flexibility of the savings plans, it totally makes sense not to do it at the individual resource level, because then you're basically just shooting yourself in the foot.
Yeah. Like, I think one thing people, especially in smaller orgs, get kind of caught up on is whether or not something is like a reservation or a savings plan is tied to a specific workload, right? Like, and you don't think of it that way. Just think of everything as a bucket of resources. Every type of workload is its own bucket. And you want to make sure, let me just share my screen real quick because I have a little graphic we can zoom in on.
We like graphics.
Yeah, graphics are cool. I'm sharing this in Words. This is like the spend, and this isn't from the database savings plan doc. This is like from the general doc. So if your savings plan hourly commitment's $100 an hour and you spend $100 the first hour, that is let's say you had a 20% discount, that would be $80. In the second hour, you spend $80. That $80 would be discounted 20%. The usage wouldn't get covered. It's kind of a little bit of a use it or lose it thing. And then here, where you're using, say, $140, the overage would not get covered. Databases and VMs generally aren't going to have overages because you have cores, like things like scale sets, or maybe even if you had a serverless database, we'll talk more about that later, could scale up. But that's the basic idea. Let me stop sharing.
So that hour 3, you would get the discount on that first hour, but anything above that is not. There is no discount for that additional 40 minutes.
It's retail. It's retail for retail. The minutes of spend you had.
So we still get that discount on the savings plan, but that extra 40 we got to pay retail, which
yeah.
I'm okay with. I mean,
and like, I think we've talked about this before, but that's having a reservations and savings plan strategy is something that's kind of important, because it's not like you're not necessarily going to have 100% coverage of reservations. You're trying to get most of your billing under reservations or savings plans, so you're getting that discount. And just to kind of go back, if you're an EA customer, you may not deal with this at all. You may just have like blanket discounts that are tied to a spend commitment. I know my most recent client is EA, and they just have discounts, but they have to spend a lot.
So I assume that you can't use them both at the same time. Can you use reservations and the new savings plans?
You cannot use reservations and savings plans at the same time. Okay. I think one applies before the other.
Yeah, I think that's right, but yeah, I thought I'd ask to make sure.
So, I think reservations apply first, as I remember correctly.
That sounds right. I'll have to go back and look at the docs, but I think that's right.
What's kind of interesting, particularly, I mean, I think judging by our video views and my Redmond column views, most of our audience is SQL Server specific. With Azure SQL Database, the difference in savings between reservations and savings plans is really pretty minimal. This was something that was a little bit of frustration to me. And I didn't put this in the article, obviously, because I didn't want to yell at Microsoft in Words online. But I did tell marketing, if you go into the Azure pricing calculator and you select a reservation for an Azure SQL database, it does not give you the discount percentage. Like, do it for any other type of resource. Like, do it for VM. It'll be like 42% off for 1 year. You know, I actually had to go to the pricing calculator, and then I had to break out the calculator on my Mac to figure out what the discounts were for Azure SQL DB. It was specifically that one. I didn't check managed instance. The pricing is very similar, but
I didn't know that. I never noticed that.
Yeah. And so get this too. Here's the other part of that that's fun. Reservations for serverless, hyperscale, general purpose, business critical. They're all different. That's why in that table it says like 15 to 34% reservation discount. Yeah, they're all different.
Well, so one, I didn't know that. I didn't know that, and I didn't know the Azure SQL Database doesn't give you the percentage. I never noticed. And I had either, all the time.
Yeah.
Well, so you mentioned percentages. Like, in looking at the documentation that Microsoft provided, and you probably mentioned it somewhere in your article, like, there are resources that have 0% savings, like SQL Server on Azure VMs. So I'm really kind of curious, and why would you put a savings plans on a resource and get 0 savings?
I got an explanation from Microsoft on this, and I still don't think I really understand it. But the notion is, if you're like in the middle of a migration and you had savings plans, and you maybe, I could maybe see it with Arc, where like you had a little bit of a disconnect from a cloud team and you were doing a cloud migration, and the cloud team, bought a savings plan, and you're still on Arc. Well, that Arc time, however long that VM runs and however many cores, counts towards your spend. You just don't get a discount on it. And my understanding as to why they didn't discount, they didn't want to go, the Arc and and hourly licenses for SQL and Azure VMs are already discounted, but they don't undercut SPA licensing. So they're discounted from retail. But I think effectively those are the same as what the SPA providers get. And Microsoft didn't want to undercut that. So that's why it's a 0% discount on those types of resources.
I guess that makes sense because then the time would go towards the spend. I think it's really weird to look at the documentation and see 0% savings for a savings plan.
Yeah. So in the context of cloud migration, I guess it could make sense. But here's where I'm a little bit of a loss. Like if you had an EA, right, and you had to spend, we'll just say $20 million a year. It's probably higher than that to get an EA now, but it's a nice round number. Sure, then give me the credit for those Arc machines and the SQL and Azure VMs, and you would if you had an EA. But like, I'm not buying a savings plan until those resources are cut over because there's no point. So like the savings plan's 1 year from the day you buy it. It's not like it's tied to a contract date or something. So it's just a weird choice. It's something that's out there. I doubt that many people are going to take advantage of that, but it is something I brought up in the article because when I first saw that in the Microsoft blog post on this, I was like, what the hell?
I'd be curious in a year's time if Microsoft would tell us the telemetry about like how many people are using that.
They will not.
Yeah, probably not. Probably not, but I'd be curious.
And even if they told us, we couldn't tell anybody else.
Yeah, well, that's very true. That might be true. That very might be true.
I guess I can break an EA because it's like 8 years later. I remember we were in an MVP summit and they showed like a mask list of features in SQL Server and who was using them by telemetry. And there was one that was 2 people, and we later confirmed it was StretchDB, which has since been deprecated.
A good old StretchDB.
Yeah.
How I missed if side note, if that product hadn't been priced out of the universe, it actually probably would have been a good product. But
no, that's a service that like if they had been able to hold on to the service till hyperscale went GA, it'd be a fantastic feature. It was already a pretty good feature that nobody used because for those of you who don't know the history of this, StretchDB, when SQL Server 2016 was in development, was supposed to use an Azure SQL Database as its like secondary storage. Somebody in business planning, who I don't know the name of, I've just heard this from like 10 engineers, decided that they didn't want to sell 8 million single instance StretchDBs on SQL DBs running like S3s. They wanted to sell 100 SQL data warehouses to enterprise companies. Well, the problem was enterprise companies, if they need another terabyte of storage, they have it.
Yeah. They just go buy it.
Yeah, or like they have the capacity.
Yeah,
like the people who need like another terabyte of storage in a hurry, they can't just go buy it. Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah.
So StretchDB died. But it goes back to the thing. Man, pricing's a key element of these cloud services. And I feel like that's something that's hampered Cosmos, and Cosmos is part of this equation. Like so many people I've talked to about Cosmos are like, either it's way too expensive or I have no idea how much it's going to cost and they're scared off by it.
Well, and I mean, the discount for Cosmos out of savings plans is only 12%, but it's better than nothing.
Yeah. Their reservations discounts a little bit all over the place because it's based on usage. So I did put in a chart at the end, and we'll talk through that later about what it looked like for a savings plan discount. But yeah, it's 12%, and it's based on your usage, I think. The reservations are also based on your usage.
Better than nothing. And
yeah,
as you mentioned, Cosmos is expensive, so any discount is better than nothing, and we certainly don't want to pay retail.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Let's talk storage. So savings plans, I assume, does not touch storage.
It does not. And in doing my research for this article, the only discounts I've seen on storage are you can buy, if you're buying 100 terabytes or a petabyte
blob storage,
you can get reservations on those. Arvin, who from the product team who helped me write this, did a good job of like kind of elucidating. Hang on, I'm trying to share the storage thing. At first, I was like, but you get some storage free, right? And you don't. So let's zoom in here because this isn't. So this is the pricing screen from the Azure portal for an Azure SQL database. If you're on the DTU tier, the old tier, which we know and love, and has like databases that are like $5 a month, you do get storage free. However, reservations and savings plans do not apply to the DTU tier. Reservations might, I don't remember, I didn't check that, but savings plans definitely do not. So they're only available on the vCore model. And as you can see here, where my mouse is, your pricing is split into compute and storage. Here I have 512. That looks like that didn't get, it got picked up 12 cents. So $665 in storage, $184 a month. That math isn't mathing for me. Because they don't give me the cost on the storage. That's the problem. Anyway, the storage is a separate line item and it's not counted. So yeah, your discount's only on the database compute.
So no storage. Wah, wah, wah.
Yeah, I don't think that's a big deal, but it's just something to be aware of, especially if you're like a hyperscale customer and you have, tens or 20s of terabytes and your storage bill is super expensive. That's something to be aware of.
So we talked about reservations, as a former or a current option to help save money. And looking at the chart, it looks like Azure SQL Database. Well, no, because reservations I can save upwards of like 70%. So do I save more? Like, should I use reservations above savings plans?
If you know you're going to be in one region and you know you're going to be locked in, reservations are probably a better deal. If you know you're going to be on one type of Azure database portfolio, whatever we're calling it this week, if you know you're going to be locked in on one thing, yeah. One of the things that this brings up, and the marketing even brought it up, they admit it, you may have noticed capacity in Azure is challenging at times, specifically if you're in a region that ends in region.
East.
Or you're basically anywhere in Europe that's not Sweden Central. Yeah, East 2, West. Like I couldn't get a 16-core VM the other day in a customer subscription that had a gay. But yeah, capacity is tight and they know that. So that means you're seeing a lot more customers that are deploying resources across multiple regions, even if they don't necessarily want to. And so they're aware of that. And it's one of the reasons why they did the savings plan thing. So if you're locked in and you have the resources you have and you know you're going to have those resources and you're not, say, changing from SQL Server to Postgres, why would you ever do that? Or Postgres to SQL Server? I can see why you might do that. I would go reservations because you can get a higher discount percentage. On SQL Database, it's not that much of a difference, so you might want to have that flexibility. But yeah, that's the basic idea. You'll save more on reservations.
I can see, like, if you have multiple Azure SQL databases across multiple regions, savings plans might be better just for the flexibility of it. But of course, you'd have to do the math. But of course, we would recommend anything's better than nothing in terms of paying retail pay-as-you-go prices for Azure resources or cloud resources. So
yeah, for sure. The storage reservations, just like FYI, they don't apply to even VMs. It's only like blob storage. So like if you're storing videos or images or large files, that's where you can save that. If you have 100 terabytes, that's the cheapest spend.
So the savings plans doesn't get applied to the storage; it gets applied to the compute. Yes.
Correct. And technically the licensing component.
So hyperscale is free.
Yeah, so it's only the compute there. I'm having a discussion with somebody about Microsoft about that, or about hyperscale. I don't know the scope of the discussion, but that's something I'm going to bring up. I think hyperscale being free is good, but I think it's confusing as all get out.
I think it's free. I think I've actually talked to clients that they are worried that eventually Microsoft is going to change direction and charge for SQL.
Microsoft has sworn up and down that they won't do that. I believe that as long as there's not a new CVP of data or whatever.
I agree. And I love hyperscale, right? We think hyperscale is a great architecture and we think it's a great service.
I mean, honestly, if you had to pay GP prices for hyperscale, I'd use it anyway. Because like it's one of the only cloud database resources that exist where you can scale storage independently from compute. And something we all know as database professionals, there are a lot of workloads that have a ton of data, but they're not that busy in terms of like the querying that they do, or maybe it's just a big data warehouse and the query engine's really efficient with column store, and you can get away with like 8 cores and having like 10 terabytes of data. And there's nothing else besides hyperscale that lets you do that. I mean, you can do it in a VM, but like outside of a VM, there's no database service that lets you scale those two things independently.
Yep, totally agree. Well, so savings plans. Is there anything else that you want to bring up?
Let's just run through. I put together this like sample
calculator.
Like a sample use case, just so we could see some real numbers. And this is in my column, but I think mine's a little bit prettier. Let me make it bigger here.
Remember, Joey on SQL, redmondmag.com.
Yeah.
Shameless plug. I have no affiliation. I'm not getting paid to say that either.
Oh man. Well, I may have to edit this.
While we wait, remember, if you're paying retail prices in any cloud service, whether it's AWS, Amazon, Azure, GCP, you're doing it wrong.
I'm not going to edit this because that wasn't that long. I agree with John. So here you can see This is a detailed cost breakdown. This is an East US. We have
zoom
like
in.
12. We have 12 cores of Azure SQL Database, GP,
You need to
4
zoom in.
cores of
Hang on.
serverless.
Zoom in.
Thanks. Not that much.
For those of us that are home and are old, because we need glasses.
Yeah, is that better?
No,
I
a
can
little
go
more.
one.
Come more. There you go. Okay, that's better.
Yeah, there we go.
That'll work. That'll
Okay.
work.
Yeah, so we have 12 cores of GP, 4 cores of serverless, 12 cores of, or 8 cores of Postgres, 4 cores of MySQL, and then a Cosmos DB. And here you can see the SQL databases, we get 20% across. The serverless, we get 35%. Serverless costs more per minute, so always keep that in mind. That's why the discount rate's higher, because you pay for that auto scale. Serverless is really good to use if you're not using your database that much or you have wild swings in scale. But just remember, it's more expensive. So it's not, you don't necessarily want to use serverless. Feel free to reach out to DCAC if you need help deciding if you need serverless or not.
Absolutely.
But here you can see the monthly savings on all those things. So like our serverless cost is almost in half. You can see the 20% discount applied. And our total monthly cost goes from $4,400 to $3,500. So 19.2% blended. So not a bad savings. You'll see more than that with reservations, but it's going to depend on your reservation commitment. And of course, we have the whole you're tied to a region thing. So just keep that in mind before you make any decisions on how you should apply savings plans and or reservations.
Well, and so was that savings plans across the entire that savings plans was across the entire portfolio though, right?
Correct.
So that, I mean, looking at that chart, it's very visible in terms of the flexibility that provides, is that you buy a savings plan for the whole portfolio and not have to nickel and dime each resource in each region.
And you get these discounts. So
yeah.
Like if you have a rough idea of what your usage is going to look like, it's really easy to apply savings plans. And I think that's the real benefit. You don't even need to know region. You just need to know roughly what our usage is going to be. And you have that flexibility. And they're only a year. So reservations can be a year, but they can be 3 years. You save more money on 3 years. Obviously, you're locked into that spend for 3 years.
Well, 20% is better than nothing. So
yeah, for sure.
For sure.
An easy way to get started. Doesn't matter what region.
And therefore, you're not paying retail prices as with pay as you go, which you and I both abhor. So, well, awesome. Well, I don't have any other questions unless there's anything else you want to talk about.
No, I think that's good. Check out our videos, and we're going to be launching. We're going to try to do a YouTube short of this. So you might see a YouTube short of this on LinkedIn or something. So give us some feedback on that. And like and subscribe as always.
Yep. And don't pay retail.
Don't pay Azure retail.
All right. Don't pay Azure retail.